Afternoon, committee. We are ready to start our Tuesday, March 12th utility meeting. And to start off, is there any members on WebEx?
No members on WebEx, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Okay, before we get started here too, Senator Francisco has some people here today in committee. So Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, this week I have 2 pages with me from Lawrence High School. So I'll ask them to stand. Kingston Jacobs and Grace Schulte.
Welcome.
And they picked the utilities meeting over climbing up to the dome.
Awesome. I think that was a good pick. I'd have went that way too. So. Okay, business today, we're going to open the hearing on HB 2590. And if Nick Myers would step forward, Assistant Revisor, we would appreciate an overview. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. Committee, kind of a short bill here. So House Bill 2590 would amend current law KSA 66-151 to update the maximum pipeline safety penalties that can be imposed by the State Corporation Commission for safety violations. So these penalties would be updated in state law to reflect the current penalties that are provided by the federal government under 49 U.S.C. 6122. They're going to essentially match that federal statute, and the penalties would be updated to match that statute in an amount of $200,000 or up to $200,000 per violation per day, and then a maximum of $2 million for a related series of violations. And Mr. Chairman and committee members, this bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, which is July 1, 2024, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Paul Owings. I'm the Deputy Chief Engineer for the KCC, and I'll be providing testimony in support of House Bill 2590 today. The KCC has had a pipeline safety program since 1970. Our program's what's known as a 6105 program. That gives us the ability to inspect pipeline systems and enforce pipeline safety on Kansas gas operators. Pipeline safety was established in federal law. The federal law gives states primacy over intrastate pipeline systems. However, the federal law requires that state maximum penalties be substantially similar to federal maximum penalties. I think it's important to acknowledge that these are maximum penalties and they don't stipulate how we administer our program. So PHMSA is the federal agency that certifies the KCC's pipeline safety program. PHMSA has notified us that the state's maximum penalties are no longer considered substantially similar to the federal maximum penalties, and we're at risk of being recertified as a 6106 program. If we're recertified as a 6106 program, we'll continue to inspect pipeline safety in Kansas. However, PHMSA will determine enforcement action. PHMSA's maximum penalties are about 30% higher than the federal maximum penalties, and they increase annually based on inflation. So if the KCC's program gets recertified, then the state will lose its ability to determine enforcement action, and higher maximums will be present. The KCC also has an underground gas storage inspection program, And PHMSA has reclassified that as a 6106 program, so we did lose our enforcement abilities on that program. House Bill 2590 reconciles the state maximum penalties with the federal maximum penalties to prevent us from losing our primacy over the federal government relative to pipeline safety enforcement over Kansas gas operators. For these reasons, we ask you to support House Bill 2590. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Committee, we have any questions at this point? One that I might have for you is, how many violations have we had, like in the last year? Or what kind of history we got on violations for this type of thing?
I don't know an exact number, but we typically give violations for underground damage. So if one utility is digging and they didn't do a one call and they damage another line, I'm under the impression that a majority of the violations relate to the underground damages. I could pull Leo up here. Or...
As far as penalties, Leo Hanos. Certainly, I'm Leo Hanos, the chief engineer for the KCC. As far as penalties, we have not issued penalties to pipeline operators for quite some time. Usually, it's involving a more serious incident. We have roughly 140 violations of some kind of rule that we resolve just working with the operator. Those type of violations that we typically just deal with would go to PHMSA now for enforcement if the KCC is not the agent, is a 106 program. So it's about 140 or so, but penalties, no, we don't really offer too many, except issue too many.
So have you ever had one that was $1 million?
No, the largest one we've ever had predates me, so it's a long time ago. Was Union Gas in Independence, and I think it was $300,000. And we settled that with the work that was done instead of having the penalty. We had one with Lyons, Kansas, for about $150,000, and we negotiated that to where they did what they really needed to do, was replace the whole gas system. So it was much more money than $150,000 in that case.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Any other questions, committee? Okay, if not, thank you for your presentation. Okay, at this point, there's no other proponents that I'm aware of that might be here, or neutral testimony has been presented at this time. Is there any opponents to this bill? Okay, if not, there also is a fiscal note, committee, inside your folder. So at this point, we'll close the hearing on HB 2590. And we will continue working on HB 2588 at this point. So we have an amendment that I'm aware of. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we were talking about this bill last week, there was some discussion about setting a range or either a date or something for the 5% that would be effective in the final year. And I believe that we have language that is agreeable to all parties.
Committee, we got any questions for Senator Francisco? Yeah, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this would set the peak demand commencing July 1st, 2027, and each year thereafter at 5% of the utility's historic highest annual peak demand since 2014. I did ask when I was talking to the proponents of this bill, why they picked 2014, and that was the date that this net metering statute was introduced. So I think it's an appropriate change. This will work just like a rolling average, but in the case of a year that might be cooler than the previous year, you would still, you wouldn't have to reduce the amount, and then there would be no concern that customer generators who might have been granted permission wouldn't be able to operate under that requirement. So be happy to stand for any questions.
Senator Pittman. Oh, second motion. She hadn't made one yet, so. Senator Francisco, would you like to make a motion?
I would, Mr. Chair. I move this amendment.
Okay, I got a motion and I got a second from Senator Pittman. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, is there any other amendments at this point? And I would entertain a motion. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee move out favorably House Bill 2588 as amended.
Okay, I have a motion by Senator Francisco and a second by Senator Peterson. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, thank you. At this point, I want to make sure, committee, is there anything else before the committee? Sure, Senator Pittman.
Are we meeting tomorrow at noon?
It's on my list here. I was just getting ready to do that. Is there any other questions or comments? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were some questions that were asked about House Bill. It's 2690 during our hearing, and Sherry Massey from who's the GIS technical specialist for the Kansas 911 Coordinating Council, gave us a response. I want to thank Susie, our secretary, for making sure that the members of the committee have this today to review. I am planning to introduce an amendment that would make some of the changes for the percentage of collected 911 fees. And so rather than not letting you have any chance to review that before, I appreciate that being distributed today.
Senator Peterson.
I just want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving us time to work out the amendment on the bill we just passed.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there a second to that? No.
I'll second.
Oh, okay. Okay. Is there any other announcements for the committee at this point? Okay. This committee will be meeting tomorrow at noon, so I'm not going to announce this on the floor because everybody's here. So the reason for that, the floor is going to start up at 1 o'clock. And they asked me to bump this up. And we have so many time slots that we got to get filled in the next 2 weeks that we didn't have room to move. So it was either work tomorrow at noon or work on Friday. And so we took a vote on that one. So is there any questions about that? Okay, if not, that's all we have for today.